The gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Putnam, for as much time as he may consume.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. I think it's time for us to give sort of a status report of how we got here. 2 years ago, it was publicly revealed that one of our members of this House, a gentleman from New Orleans, had an FBI raid on his home and had discovered $90,000 in cash wrapped up in aluminum foil and in Tupperware containers in that freezer. It was also publicly revealed that this same gentleman used National Guard assets that were then being used as part of the rescue and recovery efforts after Hurricane Katrina to go to his home and recover something resembling the boxes that were later found in his freezer to be containing $90,000 in cash. Since that time, he continued to serve on the Ways and Means Committee for some period of time, which was the committee that he is alleged to have used to conspire on a continent-wide basis in bribery and racketeering of several African nations to profit himself, his family, and bring shame and discredit upon this institution. He later left that committee and was unanimously approved by the Democratic caucus to go on to the Homeland Security Committee. That committee being the committee that has jurisdiction over a number of the assets that he misappropriated in the wake of Hurricane Katrina to retrieve the boxes that resembled the ones that had the cash of $90,000 in the freezer. When it was brought to light that the Republicans would demand a public vote on that Democratic caucus action, that vote was never called for. And he remained on the Small Business Committee until today, several days after the actual indictment. That same individual, for the first time in the history of the Republic, had his congressional office raided by the FBI. Now, in the course of all those events, did the House Ethics Committee, now led by Democrats, ever open an investigation into his behavior in this Congress? The answer is no. Now, why is that? Because if an FBI investigation, $90,000 in cash, an FBI raid on a congressional office, and misappropriation of National Guard assets isn't enough to merit an ethics investigation in this body, then perhaps the majority leader could share with us what is. And he could also explain to us why, if there had been an ethics investigation, it could not have proceeded because the Speaker had not appointed members to the investigation, to the investigative pool, until today. So even if they had been proactive, there would have been no one to look in to the allegations that have brought shame and discredit upon the people's house. So it takes a peculiar rhetorical bravado to come to this House floor and say with a straight face that they have been moving forward with these investigations when for over half of the 109th Congress, the Ethics Committee could not function because the Democratic members refused to show up. And in the 110th Congress, the Ethics Investigative Pool could not function because no members had been nominated by the Speaker until today. That undermines this institution. And it is the reason why it requires a very rare motion, the privileged motion, that the minority leader is offering today. Now, Mr. Hoyer has offered a suspension bill. Suspension bills are typically used to name post offices. They are typically used to designate National Fishing and Boating Month, National Jewish History Month, National Smoke-Free Awareness Week. That's typically the route that suspension bills are pursued. And suspension means that they enjoy broad, non-controversial support in this House. So while it is, I hope, broadly supported that we would refer the Jefferson case to ethics, It seems as though that in this new, open, and accountable House chamber, that the language of such a suspension that would suspend the rules would have been shared by all the members. The rare motion that is afforded the Republican leader was available in the public domain for days, which presumably has led to the timing of the suspension vote also being offered today. As we move forward with this, I think it's important that we recognize that the real losers here are the constituents in a Louisiana congressional district who have been denied representation by someone who has brought shame and discredit upon this House, potentially, depending on the outcome of a 16-count indictment that could result in 235 years in prison. And I hope that the majority leader, in his haste to craft the suspension bill that we will consider today, has included in it improvements to the existing law as it relates to member pensions. Because nothing drives the American taxpayer more crazy than to know that potentially, if the gentleman from Louisiana is convicted, and if the gentleman from Louisiana is sentenced to prison, he would still have his family entitled to a pension. That is a watered-down version of what the House Republicans passed last year that would deny a pension to members who use their office to engage in criminal activity. And in this particular case, the people who would be eligible to continue collecting the pension are in the public domain as having been co-conspirators, beneficiaries of the illegal activity. So I hope that in his haste to craft the suspension bill, he would bring the pension issue back up for this body to put the teeth back into it that Republicans put in a year ago, and add to that additional language that perhaps the majority leader, Mr. Reid, would find acceptable in the Senate so that we can actually get it to the President's desk so that the American taxpayer doesn't have to foot the bill for convicts, thieves, racketeers, and people who engage in bribery abusing their office. This is a very serious issue for this institution, and it should be treated as such. And we should have the highest possible standard for all members who enjoy the trust in public service. And that includes the issues that follow all of us, including access to the pension, including enforcing the House rules on earmarks that have been routinely abused, and maintaining all of the other rules that we have passed and taken a victory lap for allegedly making this the most open and honest and accountable place, and yet when the rubber meets the road, the path chosen is to airdrop in earmarks, cover up misbehavior on the House floor in terms of threats and intimidation, and unanimously affirm someone who is now under a multi-page indictment, unanimously affirm that person to have a position on the Homeland Security Committee. I urge this body to endorse, support, and vote for the Republican leader's motion that will begin the process of restoring the dignity and honor and respect that this institution deserves. And I yield back my time, and I thank the leader.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield myself such time as I may consider.